Hello everyone, in this video we will discuss about social classes. Now, the social structure of ancient Egypt can be sorted into social pyramid. At the top of the social pyramid was the king or the pharaoh. As in previous video I have already told you that the kings were called pharaoh. So pharaoh was very powerful. Next came the priest. Then came the nobles, officials and scribes. This was the upper class. Then, in middle class, merchants, artisans, and farmers they formed the bulk, and slaves were at the lowest rung. All right. So first, at first tier, pharaohs were there. Then second tier, priest. Third tier, nobles, officials, and scribes. Fourth tier, merchants, artisans, and farmers. And at fifth tier, slaves. Now, Pharaoh was a god on earth and the ultimate authority in Egypt. He took all the decisions, and it was her duty to make the law and maintain order in the kingdom. People expected the Pharaoh to keep gods happy, and he was also responsible to maintain the army to defend the country from outside threats and internal difficulties. And people looked to the pharaoh to ensure their well-being. Then government officials helped ensure that country ran well. Now, duty of the priest was to conduct rituals and ceremonies in Pharaoh's name in temples to keep the gods happy. Priests were parts of ancient Egypt's daily life and they oversaw the running of the temple community. Nobles and other officials were responsible to collect taxes and look after the requirement of the people. Scribes were some of the only people in Egypt who could read and write. They kept the records of the country, including the amount of food produced and gifts presented to the gods. Scribes also kept records of the number of soldiers in the army and the number of workers on construction sites. Now, farmers were the most important part of the society because they grew crops and they were working under pharaoh or the nobles, right? Then they farmers they gave crops to pharaoh or other official, and in return farmers received food and clothing. At the bottom of this structure were the slaves. Now, most of the slaves were the prisoners of war. What does this term mean? It means that a person who is captured in the war. Okay? So, most of the slaves were prisoners of war, and people who were not able to pay off their debts and other criminals were also reduced to slavery. In Egyptian civilization, head of the family was father, and the birth of daughters was welcome. And rich women were able to live a comfortable life, whereas women who belonged to poor families they worked on the fields and looked after their houses. Rich women were also able to read and write, and Queen Hatshepsut and Queen Nefertiti are known as the powerful queens. The average family lived in a village of sun baked mud houses. The houses were fairly small with few windows or furniture, whereas the houses of rich people were decorated with paintings. Fresco. So, fresco is a kind of painting that is done on wet plaster. Looking nice and being clean was very important to the Egyptians. Mostly everyone, men and women, wore jewelry of some type. The rich wore jewelry made of gold and silver, while the poor people used copper and other cheap metals decorated with pieces of brightly painted clay. Makeup was also very important for both men and women, and the main type of makeup used was eye paint. And the rich people also wore the headdresses or wig. It was worn as per their economic standard. If the person is very rich, the headdress has to be very elaborate. It was so hot that most people wore white linen clothes. For entertainment, Egyptians danced and sang. They played different instruments also, such as lyre, harp, flute, and drums. They also played this popular game, Senet, and besides all these things, they also did hunting and fishing. Egyptians worshipped more than 2000 gods and goddesses, and each one of them were associated with life and each had a specific form. For example, this image is of Amun Ra. He was known as sun god and also the first pharaoh of the world. He is Thoth. He was known for his calculating ways and originally functioning as a moon god. He was also referenced as designer of the universe. This is Horus. He was respected as god of sky, even as a god of hunting. And this is Anubis. He was a god of death. He helped prepare the soul for the afterlife and took the dead to the hall of judgment. All these gods had a separate temple and a priest, and each city had a patron god. And as I have told you, that Egyptians also believed in life after death. And they considered that death is only a temporary phase. And after this temporary phase, there is a next life. And for this reason only, they preserved the dead bodies. And this process is called mummifying. And I have already told you in previous video also how they mummified the bodies. They used different herbs and then wrapped the body in fine linen and then preserved it. After this, they put the body in a coffin and buried it in tomb. With this, they also kept things of everyday use like food, clothes, jewelry, furniture, all these things, believing that the person would need them in his life after death. Now, occupation. You know that these civilizations grew around the rivers, right? And the soil around the river is good for farming. So, the large number of population was engaged in agriculture because the farming was quite easy. Besides this, people were engaged in carpentry, glassmaking, metalworking, fishing, and there were many occupations for people. Egyptians mastered the skill of carpentry. They made beautiful articles of wood inlaid with ivory and precious stones. And metal workers made articles of gold, copper, and other metals. They also carved statues of gods and kings. That's it for today. Once you finish watching this video, read the chapter carefully. Reading is very important, children. Please read the chapter. Whatever doubt you have, if there is any word you are not able to understand, or any sentence that is creating doubt, please ask it immediately. Thank you.